This is our next lesson for exponential functions, and we are doing domain and range. All right, so we're going to have basically three different types of graphs. Okay, so the first one we're going to talk about is the graph where it has two endpoints. Okay, and guys, we're going to do this domain and range the same way we did our linear functions. Because anytime you have an endpoint needs a number. So that means I'm going to have a number on the left and a number on the right, or a number at the bottom and a number at the top. Okay, so it's going to look just like the ones we did with linear functions where we wrote with inequalities. All right, so let's talk about it. Okay, when an exponential function has two endpoints, we're going to use the x values. Use the x values of the endpoints for your domain and use the y values of the endpoints for your range. Remember, your domain is the x, the range is the y. Values, that is. Okay, so x values, y values. Okay, now remember our domain. Since it's the x values, my x-axis goes from left to right. Now I think it may be helpful for some of you to get you two different colors and highlight. So my domain is going to be yellow. My range, I'm going to highlight green. And my range is going to use the y-axis. Okay, so now, that means that since I highlighted this line yellow and my domain is yellow, that means my numbers must come from this yellow line because that's my x-axis. Okay, so remember, we always start at the left and we go to the right. Smaller number on the left. Okay, so I need my value for this circle. But also remember we talked about the difference in our circles, because one of these circles is open, the other is closed. So remember, an open circle will have this symbol with no equal to part, and a closed circle will have this symbol with an equal to line under it. Okay, so now I need my value on the left. It's a -4. Okay, I also need my value on the right. There will be a 7 there. So it's a 7 on the right. Okay, remember there is always an x in the middle. Now I just need my symbol that goes with -4. And my symbol now that goes with the 7. So there's my domain for this function. Okay, we also need to know how to say this in words. So in words, this will be all real numbers. Now I know you have limited space on your paper, so write in the white space that's under your slide. All real numbers greater than, so remember we read this in terms of the x, 4, or -4. All real numbers greater than -4. If I cover this side up, the x is on the big wide open end, so that's x is greater than this side. Okay, and this x is, if I cover this side up, I see it's a less than or equal to 7. So less than or equal to 7. All the numbers greater than or equal, greater than -4, less than or equal to 7. Okay, now let's go to our range. Remember, our range numbers must come from the y-axis, which is the green one. Okay, and we always start at the bottom and go to the top. Okay, because the lower numbers are at the bottom. So my bottom of my graph is right here. If I go to its value, it's a -5. Okay, now I'm going to come up to the top of my graph. It's right here. Now find its value. It's a -1. Since it's range, there will be a y in the middle, and I need the symbol where the -5 is, and then the symbol where the 1 is, the negative. We read this as all real numbers. greater than or equal to. So we don't mix these up. Okay. Another separate. So greater than or equal to -5 and less than -1. All right, so that's the two endpoints. Okay, we have some U-dos next. I'm going to go to the next I-do. Okay, now on this graph, we see there's only one endpoint. Okay, so since there's only one endpoint, and I told you earlier that an endpoint needs a number, that means I'm only going to have one number since I only have one endpoint. This is my endpoint. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and do my highlights. Domain yellow, so X in yellow, and then I'm going to highlight my range, so Y in green. Okay. All right, so now notice you got one endpoint and there's an arrow. Remember, this arrow means it's just going to keep going forever and ever and ever, never will stop. Okay, so that's why we can't get a number here, because there's no number where it stops. Okay, it starts at a number, but it keeps going, doesn't stop. So that means we're only going to have one number in these, since there's only one endpoint. But our number is going to come from the X value of the endpoint for domain and the Y value of the endpoint for range. Okay, so here's our endpoint. Now remember, our domain is the X. So that means I have to go to my X-axis and get the value from there. So my X-axis is here. What's the value where this dot is? It's right here at the 0. So that means I have an X. And we got to pay attention to the direction the line is going. It's going this way, right? Which is to the right. Remember, the right means the numbers are increasing. So if they're increasing, that means they're getting greater. So this would be our greater than symbol. Okay? Also, because it's touching this line, that means it will be on the 0. So it does include the 0, so we need an equal to as well. And the value is 0. So our domain is X greater than or equal to 0, which we read as all real numbers greater than or equal to 0. Okay, because we see that it's 0 right here, but since it's going to the right, and it's going to keep on going to the right, it's anything that's greater than the 0 as well. Okay, now let's do our range. So our range is going to start off with the Y. Okay, and I need my Y value where it starts. So right in between here is going to be 250,000. Okay, now pay attention to the direction of the line. It's going up. So up is our positive direction. The numbers get bigger or greater as we go up, right? So that means this will also be greater than or equal to, because it touches the 250,000, which gives us our equal, and then it goes up, which means greater than. Okay? And our value here is the 250,000. So it can be 250,000 or anything higher than that. And we will write that as all real numbers greater than or equal to 250,000 for our range. All right. And that is doing your domain and range for one endpoint. Okay, we have one last example to do. Let me get this done. which is when we have no endpoints. So notice on this graph, we have an arrow here and an arrow here, which means it's going to keep going here and keep going here. Okay? So that means for a domain, because it's going to keep going to the left, and even though it's a slight slant, it's still slanted. So it's going to gradually keep going to the right as we go up. Okay? So that means our domain is going to be all real numbers. It's going to keep getting all those numbers to the left, that's negative, and all those numbers to the right, that's positive. So anything can be the domain. Okay? So we might as well going to write this in. All real numbers is our domain. Okay, now our range. Okay, remember our range has to go with our y-axis. Okay? So it's got to go from bottom to top. Okay? So at the bottom down here, it basically bottoms out right along this line, right? Okay, because we see it flattening out. So if it flattens out, that means it's going to run right along that line. So remember we talked about in our first lesson, this being an asymptote. So for our range, we are going to use the asymptote. Because remember, the asymptote is a line that the graph runs right along top of or beside or whatever, but it never touches it. So that means this asymptote says, hey, you're not going below me. Okay? And our asymptote is written as an equation. So this is y equals 0. So that means this line is not going below the 0. So that's where we're going to get our number from, that 0. Okay? So our range is going to say y. But since it's going up, that means it's going in the greater than direction. So we need a greater than, because it's greater than the 0. Now, does it equal the 0? No, it doesn't, because it doesn't touch the line. It's an asymptote, remember? So it looks like it's touching it, but it's really not. It's just very close, but it's not touching. It's just right on top of the line. So we can only have the greater than and then the 0. No equal to part on this. So if you have an asymptote, you're not going to have an equal. And we will read this as all real numbers greater than 0. All right, and that is your lesson on domain and range.